The millionaire arrived to set fire to the farmer's house and evict her from her land. Upon arriving, he froze at the sight of the photo of his beloved who had disappeared in a black frame. The gravel crunched under Nathan Steele's polished shoes as he stepped out of his black SUV. The late afternoon sun stretched across the horizon, casting long, jagged shadows over the land. The vast fields of golden wheat swayed gently in the breeze, whispering secrets of seasons past for a man who built his fortune in steel, glass, and concrete. The serenity of this rural landscape was almost offensive. It spoke of simplicity, patience, and roots, qualities that Nathan despised. Today, however, he wasn't here to admire the scenery. He was here to finish a negotiation that should never have taken this long. Grace Bennett's refusal to sell this land was more than an inconvenience. It was a challenge to his authority, and Nathan Steele never tolerated defiance. The farmhouse stood at the end of a dirt path, lined with weathered oak trees. The white paint peeled like old skin. The porch sagged on one side, and the roof bore the scars of many storms. Yet there was a stubborn dignity to the place, a silent declaration that it had endured and would continue to resist. Nathan's jaw tightened. He hated such sentimental attachments to land. It was dirt, wood, and stone, nothing more. He adjusted his cufflinks, took a breath, and ascended the creaking steps. His knuckles rapped against the door twice, firm, authoritative. Moments later, it opened with a soft groan. Standing before him was Grace Bennett. Her chestnut hair was pulled back into a messy braid, and a smudge of soil streaked her cheek. The scent of freshly harvested wheat and worn leather lingered around her. She was younger than he expected, late 20s maybe, but the defiance in her eyes made her seem older. "Mr. Steele," she greeted, voice flat, eyes sharp. "I figured you'd show up sooner or later." "Ms. Bennett," he said, forcing a polite smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I admire your determination, really, I do, but we both know why I'm here." "Yeah," she said, crossing her arms. "You're here to take what isn't yours." Nathan's smile faded. "I'm here to offer you an opportunity, again." He gestured to the fields beyond the porch. "These crops, this life, it's the past, Miss Bennett. The future doesn't grow here anymore. The future doesn't belong to men like you," she shot back. "And this land isn't for sale. Not today. Not ever." His jaw clenched. He'd heard many stubborn refusals over the years, but there was something different here. It wasn't empty stubbornness. It was loyalty, conviction. It irritated him more than he wanted to admit. "You know," he said, lowering his tone, "I don't usually waste time with these long conversations. I get what I want, and I always win." "Not here, Mr. Steele." Nathan stepped forward, his shadow enveloping Grace. "Let me explain something very clearly. If you don't sell this land, I'll destroy it. I'll have it condemned, rezone it, and when the flames come, there won't be a single ear of wheat left to remember your precious legacy." Grace didn't flinch. "You think I'm afraid of you." Nathan was about to respond, when his eyes caught something through the open door. A photograph hung on the wall above a small wooden mantel. The black frame was simple, old-fashioned, and within it, a face he hadn't seen in 25 years. His breath caught in his throat. The world around him tilted. Isabel, the woman he had searched for, the woman he had loved, the woman who vanished without a trace. His vision blurred, memories rushing back like a sudden storm. Her laughter, the scent of lavender on her skin, the last time he saw her stepping into a taxi and disappearing forever. "Where did you get that picture?" he demanded, voice breaking. Grace shifted uneasily. "Why do you care? Answer me." He stepped forward, eyes locked on the photograph. "It's my mom," she said, her brow furrowing. "Isabel Bennett." Nathan stumbled back, gripping the railing for support. A cold sweat broke across his forehead. Isabel, his Isabel, the woman who had vanished, had a daughter. "No," he whispered. "That's impossible." "It's the truth," Grace said, voice guarded. "She disappeared when I was 5. I barely remember her." Nathan stared at the photograph. Isabel's eyes, that gentle smile, it was all there, reflected now in Grace's face. How could this be? He had searched for so long. He had given up hope. And all this time, she'd been here, rooted to this farm. She never told me, he said, voice raw. She never said she was pregnant. Well, Grace said, tightening her grip on the door. Maybe she didn't trust you. Nathan flinched as though he'd been punched. The accusation hung in the air. He had power, money, connections, but the truth was out of his reach. He needed answers. He needed to know what happened to Isabel, and why Grace had grown up alone. His eyes softened, the businessman's mask slipping away. I loved her, he said quietly, and I need to know what happened to her. Grace didn't answer. She just stared at him, torn between disbelief and fear. Nathan took a step back and nodded once, decisively. I'm not going anywhere, Miss Bennett. I'll find out the truth. About Isabel, about this farm, and about why she disappeared. He turned and walked away. But with each step, the ground beneath his feet felt less like solid earth, and more like the crumbling edge of a cliff. Nathan Steele sat in the driver's seat of his SUV, gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. The photograph of Isabel haunted him, its image seared into his mind like a scar reopening after years of silence. Isabel Bennett, the woman he had spent countless nights searching for, had a daughter. His daughter, and she had lived here, hidden in plain sight, on this stubborn farm that he had nearly destroyed. The cool evening air seeped through the cracked window, carrying the scent of freshly turned soil. He forced himself to breathe, but each inhale was shallow, weighed down by disbelief and regret. 25 years he thought back to the night Isabel vanished. One moment, she was in his arms, whispering promises of a life together. The next, she was gone. He hired private investigators, combed through hospitals, morgues, even airports. Nothing. No trace. No explanation. The woman he loved had vanished without a whisper of closure. Now here she was, or at least her legacy, standing on the porch of that weathered farmhouse, staring at him with eyes that mirrored Isabel's so perfectly it hurt. Grace Bennett, his daughter. He needed answers, and there was only one place to start, with the past. He shifted the car into gear and drove back to town. The rhythmic hum of the tires against the gravel road echoed his racing thoughts. Isabel had vanished, but someone knew why. Someone had orchestrated her disappearance. And if Grace had survived, it meant Isabel had fought to protect her from something, or someone. The next morning, Nathan walked into the office of William Harris, the best private investigator his money could buy. The cluttered space smelled of burnt coffee and worn leather, with papers stacked precariously on every surface. William, a wiry man in his 60s, adjusted his glasses and gestured for Nathan to sit. It's been a while since you've needed me, William said, tapping his pen against a notepad. What's going on? I found her, Nathan said, voice strained. Who? Isabel. William froze. The pen slipped from his fingers. Wait, the Isabel Bennett you spent half your fortune trying to find 2 decades ago. Nathan nodded, running a hand through his hair. She had a daughter, my daughter, and she disappeared for a reason. I need you to find out why. William's eyes darkened with recognition. You sure you want to open that door again? Last time, we hit nothing but dead ends. Yeah, well, this time I've got a starting point, Grace Bennett. Her mother lived on that farm before she disappeared. He leaned forward. Find out who wanted Isabel gone. Dig into the past. No limits. William jotted notes without another word. 2 days later, Nathan returned to the farmhouse. He parked a few yards away and sat in the car for a moment, watching Grace through the window as she sorted through receipts at the kitchen table. She moved with the same quiet determination Isabel had. He recognized the way her forehead creased when she concentrated, the way her mouth pressed into a thin line when she was deep in thought. He knocked once, and she opened the door just enough to glare at him. Didn't think you'd come back, she said. I said I would, Nathan replied. May I come in? No. Please, Grace. I just want to talk. She hesitated. Then, with a sigh, she stepped back. He entered the house and paused, eyes immediately drawn to the photograph above the mantel. Isabel's eyes stared back at him, unchanged by the years that had hollowed out his heart. Grace followed his gaze. You knew her, she said softly. I loved her, Nathan answered, voice thick with emotion. We were supposed to build a life together, and then she disappeared. No goodbye, no explanation, just gone. Grace crossed her arms. And now you think showing up here changes anything? No, I know it doesn't, he exhaló devagar. But I think Isabel was running from something. Someone. She didn't just leave, she hid. And she left you here to protect you. Why would she do that? That's what I'm trying to find out. He studied her face, searching for a glimmer of trust. Please, Grace, let me help you. Let me help us figure out what happened to her. Grace bit her bottom lip, uncertainty etched into every feature. Then she turned and walked to a small chest near the bookshelf. She opened it and retrieved a worn, leather-bound notebook. When she handed it to Nathan, her hands trembled slightly. This was hers, she said. It's the only thing she left behind. Nathan opened the notebook with reverence. The handwriting was unmistakably Isabel's. Delicate, yet firm, like the woman herself. He scanned the first page, reading her words aloud. They're watching me. I don't know how much time I have. If something happens to me, Grace must be protected. I can't let them find her. Nathan's breath caught in his throat. His gaze snapped to Grace. Who was after her? Grace whispered. I don't know, Nathan said, heart pounding. But I swear to you, we're going to find out. Outside, hidden in the shadows of the oak trees, a black sedan sat with its engine off. The figure inside lowered binoculars and reached for a phone. He found the journal. The man said into the receiver, Nathan Steele knows about the girl. The voice on the other end of the line responded coldly. Then it's time to act. The morning sun crept over the horizon, casting soft amber hues across the fields as Grace Bennett stood at the kitchen window, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. The events of the past 2 days replayed in her mind like a film reel stuck on repeat. Nathan Steele. The name alone stirred a mixture of resentment and disbelief in her chest. He was supposed to be her enemy, the ruthless businessman trying to strip away her home. Yet, now, he claimed to be her father, the man her mother had loved and feared losing. And then there was the journal, filled with cryptic warnings about shadowy figures and the ominous threat that someone was watching. The smell of brewing coffee wafted through the air as she turned to the small table where the leather-bound notebook lay open. Her mother's handwriting, once a comforting memory from childhood, now felt like a message from beyond the grave, a plea for protection that Grace didn't know how to interpret. Isabel had lived with fear in her heart, but fear of what? Or who? A sharp knock at the door snapped her from her thoughts. Her pulse quickened as she glanced toward the window. Outside, Nathan stood on the porch, his hands tucked into the pockets of his tailored jacket. Grace's jaw tightened. She didn't want to let him in. Not again. But the image of that car parked by the oak trees the night before haunted her. Someone else was watching. And whether she liked it or not, Nathan seemed to be the only person who knew where to start. She opened the door and leaned against the frame, her expression guarded. You're back, she said. I told you I would be, Nathan replied, his tone calm but his eyes restless. May I come in? Grace hesitated. I'm not sure that's a good idea. I get it, Nathan said. You have every reason not to trust me. I showed up threatening to burn down your home. Now I'm telling you I'm your father and that someone might have killed your mother. He paused, glancing past her toward the journal on the table. I wouldn't believe me either. She shifted uncomfortably. What do you want? To protect you, Nathan said simply, and to find out what really happened to Isabel. The sincerity in his voice unsettled her. Nathan Steele was supposed to be an arrogant, heartless man, yet here he stood, eyes shadowed with worry, voice cracking with an emotion she didn't expect. Against her better judgment, she stepped aside. He walked in, his gaze immediately landing on the notebook. Have you read more? He asked, pointing toward it. Just bits and pieces, Grace said, closing the door behind her. It's mostly about the farm, and then the warnings. Nathan pulled out a chair and sat. Careful as if the leather journal might disintegrate sob su tok, he flipped to the middle, scanning the pages with furrowed brows. Look here, he said, turning the notebook toward her. The date was written at the top, April 17th. Beneath it, Isabel had scribbled a frantic entry. I saw the black car again today. It followed me past the old mill road. I know it's them. Richard warned me to disappear, but I can't leave Grace. I won't let them take her. Richard? Grace asked. Nathan's face paled. Richard Steele, he said slowly. My uncle, my mentor. He rubbed his temples as if trying to piece together a puzzle. He told me Isabel left because she realized she didn't belong with me, that she wanted a simpler life. He clenched his jaw. I believed him. Grace felt a cold dread spread through her chest. You think he was involved? I don't know, Nathan admitted. But if my uncle had a hand in her disappearance, I swear I'll find out. Before Grace could respond, her phone buzzed on the counter. She picked it up and frowned. The number was blocked. Hello? She answered. A deep, unfamiliar voice came through the line. You should stop digging, the caller said. Some truths are better left buried. The line went dead. Grace's fingers trembled as she lowered the phone. Nathan stood immediately. What is it? She showed him the screen. Someone just warned me to stop looking. Nathan's expression hardened. That means we're getting close. Without another word, he pulled his own phone from his pocket and called William Harris. The investigator answered on the third ring. William, it's me. We just got a warning call, Nathan said, pacing the room. Trace Grace's number. Find out who made that call. Already working on it, William said. Listen, Nathan. I've been digging into Richard Steele's past like you asked. There's something you need to see. Where are you? At my office, but make it quick. I think someone's been watching me too. Nathan ended the call and turned to Grace. Get your coat. We're going to see Harris. The drive into town was tense, the silence between them thick with unspoken fears. Grace sat stiffly in the passenger seat, eyes scanning the rearview mirror every few seconds. Nathan noticed and tightened his grip on the wheel. The weight of responsibility pressed against his chest. Not just for the truth, but for Grace's safety. For years, he had focused solely on his empire. Convinced that love was a weakness, now he realized that ignorance had cost him everything. Isabel, Grace, and perhaps even his own conscience. When they reached Harris's office, the blinds were drawn, and the usually bustling street was eerily quiet. Nathan killed the engine and stepped out. Signaling for Grace to stay behind, the front door was slightly ajar. His instincts screamed danger. He pushed the door open and entered. The office was ransacked, papers scattered across the floor, drawers pulled out, files shredded. William's desk chair was overturned, and his laptop screen flickered with static. Nathan's gaze lowered to the floor. William Harris lay motionless on the rug, his eyes wide open in a frozen expression of shock. A single bullet hole marred his forehead. Nathan swore under his breath, his pulse racing. His phone buzzed in his pocket. An unknown number. He answered. Stop digging. Mr. Steele, the voice said, or Grace will be next. The call ended, leaving Nathan in cold, suffocating silence. Nathan Steele stood frozen in the dimly lit office, the phone still pressed to his ear long after the line had gone dead. The voice echoed in his mind, cold, calculated, and terrifyingly specific. Stop digging, or Grace will be next. His pulse pounded in his ears, drowning out the faint hum of the desk lamp that flickered beside William Harris's lifeless body. He lowered the phone slowly and took a shaky breath. The metallic tang of blood mixed with the stale odor of paper and old coffee, making his stomach churn. William had been his go-to investigator for years, a man who thrived on uncovering the ugliest truths. Now his corpse lay sprawled across the faded carpet like a grotesque warning. Nathan turned toward the door. Through the cracked blinds, he saw Grace sitting stiffly in the passenger seat of his car. Her eyes darted around the street, her knuckles white as she gripped her phone. She didn't know yet. She didn't know that the danger her mother once feared was now staring her directly in the face. He stepped outside, forcing his face into an expression of calm. Grace rolled down the window as he approached. What happened? She asked, voice tense. William's not here, Nathan said. Technically, it wasn't a lie. We need to go. She hesitated. Did you find anything? Not yet, Nathan said, glancing over his shoulder. The hairs on his neck prickled. A black sedan sat parked half a block away, engine off. Windows tinted, the same model he'd noticed near the farmhouse the night before. His heart hammered against his ribs. We'll figure it out later. For now, we need to move. He got into the driver's seat and started the car. Grace shifted uncomfortably beside him as they pulled away. He watched the rearview mirror. The black sedan hesitated for a moment, then slid onto the street behind them. They're following us, Nathan muttered. Grace's eyes widened. What? Who? Stay calm. He tightened his grip on the wheel and turned left without signaling. The sedan followed. He took another turn, this time down a narrow alley lined with rusting dumpsters. The sedan mirrored the move. Okay, Nathan whispered to himself. Let's see how bad they want it. He gunned the engine, accelerating toward the end of the alley. At the last second, he jerked the wheel to the right, cutting through a side street just narrow enough for their SUV. The sedan tried to follow, but the tight corner was too sharp. There was a screech of metal as it clipped the brick wall and skidded to a halt. Grace clutched the dashboard. What the hell is going on? Nathan's jaw clenched as he sped through the empty streets. Someone doesn't want us digging into Isabel's disappearance. Who? Richard. Maybe, Nathan said. Or someone working for him. I don't know yet. But we're too close to stop now. The old highway stretched ahead of them, endless and desolate beneath the early evening sky. Grace sat in tense silence, her gaze fixed on the horizon. My mom was scared, she said softly, after several minutes. I remember her locking the doors every night. She'd sit by the window with a baseball bat. I thought it was just her being overprotective. She swallowed hard. But she was right, wasn't she? Someone really was after us. Nathan's heart ached at the fear in her voice. He wanted to promise her safety. But the truth was, he didn't know if he could deliver. He had no idea how deep Richard's treachery went, or how far these people were willing to go. They drove for over an hour before Nathan turned down an old dirt path that led to a secluded cabin. The place was small, with a sagging roof and boarded-up windows. But it was safe, or at least safer than anywhere else they'd been. This place, Grace asked, stepping out of the car and surveying the surroundings. My father bought it years ago, Nathan said, scanning the area for signs of intruders. We used to come here before he died. No one knows about it. He unlocked the door, ushered her inside, and bolted it behind them. The interior smelled of cedar and dust, the furniture draped in white sheets. Nathan checked each room, his instincts on high alert, satisfied they were alone. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number he hadn't called in years. Collins, came a gruff voice on the other end. I need a favor, Nathan said. I need surveillance, background checks, and full security detail on Richard Steele, now. There was a pause. Damn, Nathan, I thought you were done with these games. So did I, Nathan said. But it turns out my uncle's been playing dirty for decades. He had someone killed today. He might come after my daughter next. Your daughter. Collins sounded genuinely shocked. Didn't know you had one. Neither did I, Nathan said bitterly. Until 2 days ago. Okay, Collins said after a beat. I'll get my best people on it. But watch your back. If Richard's cleaning house, you're on his list. Nathan ended the call and sat down at the kitchen table, his shoulders heavy with exhaustion. Grace sat across from him, her eyes still sharp with unspoken questions. You really think your uncle killed my mom? She asked. Nathan rubbed his hands together, trying to piece the fragments of the puzzle. Isabel was pregnant when she disappeared, and Richard knew. He probably saw you as a threat to the family fortune. And Isabel, she must have tried to protect you by running away. Grace's expression shifted from fear to determination. We can't let him get away with it. We won't, Nathan said. But we have to be smart. He's dangerous. A noise outside made both of them freeze. Footsteps on gravel. Nathan grabbed the old hunting rifle from above the fireplace and motioned for Grace to stay behind him. He crept to the window and peered through the curtain. The footsteps stopped. The cabin was surrounded by trees, the shadows long and thick. Nathan's heart raced. Then, out of the darkness, came the sharp crack of a gunshot. The window beside him shattered. Grace screamed. Nathan ducked, dragging her to the floor. More shots followed, splintering the walls and furniture. We've got to move, Nathan said through gritted teeth. How? Grace whispered. He pointed toward the trap door near the pantry. Crawl space. Go. Now. She hesitated for a second, then scrambled toward it. Nathan followed, heart hammering, as bullets tore through the cabin walls like angry wasps. He slammed the trapdoor shut just as footsteps reached the front porch. Above them, the door creaked open. The attackers were inside, and they were hunting them. The air beneath the cabin floor was thick with dust, each shallow breath a struggle against the suffocating stillness. Nathan Steele lay pressed against the cool earth, his body tense, muscles coiled like springs ready to snap. Beside him, Grace clutched his arm, her breathing rapid and uneven. The faint tremble of her hand against his skin made his heart ache. She was terrified, and he couldn't blame her. Footsteps creaked above them, slow and deliberate, each step a reminder that the enemy was close. Too close. Nathan shifted slightly, angling his head to peer through the narrow gaps in the wooden planks. The intruders moved with the confidence of professionals. One pair of heavy boots crossed toward the kitchen, while another stopped just above the trapdoor. The man knelt, his shadow stretching through the cracks. A flashlight beam cut through the darkness. Sweeping across the floor, the light paused directly over the trapdoor's edges. Grace's grip tightened, her nails digging into Nathan's forearm. He covered her hand with his own, giving a reassuring squeeze. His heart thundered in his chest as the beam hovered for a few agonizing seconds. Then the light shifted away. The man above muttered something into a radio. Nathan strained to hear the words. "Nothing here," the voice said, low and rough. "Maybe they doubled back. We'll keep looking." The footsteps retreated. The front door creaked, then slammed shut. The hum of an engine rumbled to life, tires crunching gravel as the vehicles rolled away. Silence followed, thick and oppressive. Nathan didn't move for several minutes. He listened for any signs of deception. Footsteps returning, a creak on the porch, but heard nothing. Finally, he exhaled slowly and released Grace's hand. "They're gone," he whispered. "Are you sure?" Her voice was shaky. "Yeah, for now." He pushed open the trapdoor and climbed out cautiously. The cabin was wrecked. Bullet holes riddled the walls, shards of glass covered the floor, and the lamp by the window was shattered, its filament still glowing faintly. Nathan helped Grace out of the crawl space and guided her to the couch. Her face was pale, eyes wide. "Why is this happening?" she asked, voice cracking. "Because Richard never let go of his fear," Nathan said, kneeling beside her. "He built an empire on lies and greed, and your mother was a threat to that. Now he knows we're digging for the truth." Grace shook her head. "I don't get it. Why would he go to all this trouble, my mom? She wasn't dangerous. She just wanted to raise me and live her life." "She knew something," Nathan said, jaw tightening. "Something Richard couldn't afford to let surface. And whatever it was big enough to make him kill her." Tears welled in Grace's eyes, but she blinked them back with stubborn resolve. Nathan recognized that expression. It was the same one Isabel wore when she made a decision she wouldn't back down from. "So what now?" she asked. "We hit back," Nathan said. "But first, we need to disappear for a while, lay low until we figure out our next move." He pulled out his phone and dialed Collins again. "Yeah," Collins answered, voice groggy. "We were just ambushed at the cabin," Nathan said. "They were pros," Collins swore. "Okay, get to the safe house in Oak Ridge. I'll have my guys sweep the roads and run facial recognition on whoever hit you." "Thanks." Nathan hung up and turned to Grace. "Let's go." The drive to Oak Ridge was tense. Nathan kept checking the mirrors, watching for shadows that might indicate they were being followed. Grace sat silently, arms wrapped around herself as though trying to hold her world together. He wanted to comfort her, but didn't know how. How do you tell someone who just survived an ambush that everything will be okay when you aren't sure it will? 2 hours later, they pulled into the driveway of a small, nondescript house on the edge of a dense forest. Collins was waiting on the porch, smoking a cigarette. His broad frame was partially hidden by shadows, but his eyes were sharp as ever. "You look like hell," Collins said as Nathan stepped out. "Feel like it too," Nathan muttered. "Grace, this is Collins. He's an old friend." Grace gave a tight nod. Collins flicked the cigarette into the grass. "Let's talk inside." The house was small but secure, with reinforced locks and thick curtains over the windows. Collins laid out a file on the kitchen table. "I ran a quick trace on that warning call Grace got," Collins said. "The number was routed through 3 different servers, but we tracked the origin to an old warehouse downtown. Guess who owns it?" Nathan's jaw clenched. "Richard Steele." "Bingo," Collins said, tapping the folder. "And there's more. And Richard's been quietly transferring money into offshore accounts. The payments started right around the time you started poking around Isabel's disappearance. He's paying to clean up loose ends," Nathan said. Collins nodded. "Including Harris, and possibly you two." Grace's breath hitched. Nathan rubbed his temples. the weight of it pressing down on him. Richard wasn't just covering up an old secret. He was actively trying to erase it. "What do we do?" Grace asked. Nathan met Collins's gaze. "We go to that warehouse. If Richard hid something about Isabel there, we find it." Grace stood straighter. "I'm going with you." "No," Nathan said immediately. "It's too dangerous. I'm not sitting on the sidelines while you dig into my mother's past," she shot back. "This is my fight too." Nathan saw Isabel's fire in Grace's eyes, and he realized that, like her mother, Grace would never back down. "Fine," he said reluctantly. "We go together, but we go prepared." The next night, they parked a block away from the warehouse. The structure loomed in the darkness, rusted metal siding peeling like dead skin. Collins handed Nathan a pistol and passed another to Grace. She hesitated but accepted it. "Stay close," Nathan whispered as they crept toward the side entrance. Collins disabled the alarm, and the door creaked open. Inside, the warehouse smelled of oil and mildew. They moved past crates marked with Richard Steele's company logo. At the back, a metal door stood slightly ajar. Nathan pushed it open. The small office beyond was lined with filing cabinets. On the desk lay a thick folder labeled Project Eclipse. Nathan opened it and felt his heart drop. Inside were surveillance photos of Isabel, dozens of them, spanning years. There were records of her movements, hospital visits, even ultrasound images labeled. Subject Bennett, Isabel, offspring viable, high-priority target. Nathan's breath caught. Isabel hadn't just been running. She'd been hunted. A noise sounded behind them. They spun around as a figure stepped into the doorway. "Hello, Nathan," Richard Steele said, a cold smile on his lips. "I was wondering when you'd get here." The air in the warehouse thickened as Richard Steele's voice slithered through the shadows. His figure stood silhouetted against the dim light from the corridor. His posture relaxed but predatory. The faint smirk on his lips was the same one Nathan remembered from childhood. The smirk of a man who always knew more than he was willing to share. "Richard," Nathan said, stepping slightly in front of Grace. His grip tightened around the pistol. "What the hell is this?" Richard's eyes flicked to the folder on the desk, the one marked Project Eclipse. His smile didn't falter. "Ah," he said softly. "So, you found it. I suppose congratulations are in order." "Don't play games with me," Nathan snapped. "What is Project Eclipse?" "Why were you tracking Isabel?" Richard tilted his head slightly, like a snake sizing up its prey. He stepped into the office, moving with the ease of a man who believed he was untouchable. "Isabel," he said, almost nostalgically. "She was a complication, a loose end we never managed to tie up completely." Grace's breath caught beside Nathan. Her knuckles whitened around the pistol she held. Nathan felt the tremor of her anger and fear, but he kept his own focus steady. "She was pregnant when she disappeared," Nathan said through gritted teeth. "You knew, and you didn't tell me." "Of course I knew," Richard said, his voice like silk dragged over broken glass. "I knew from the moment she walked into your life. You were always so impulsive, Nathan, so naive, falling for some small-town girl. It was pathetic." Nathan's vision blurred with rage. His finger twitched on the trigger. "Why did you go after her?" "Because she was never supposed to be part of the equation," Richard replied, voice hardening. "Our family's legacy, the Steele Empire, was built to last for generations. You were supposed to continue that without distractions. But then she got pregnant. She became a liability." Grace took a step forward. "She was a person," she spat, "not a liability." Richard's gaze shifted to her, and something cold sparked in his eyes. "Ah, and there she is, the offspring, the anomaly." He gave a mirthless chuckle. "You know, Grace, you were never meant to survive." Nathan lunged forward, shoving the gun toward Richard's chest. "Shut your mouth." Richard didn't flinch. "Go ahead, shoot me," he said, voice low. "It won't stop what's already been set in motion. Project Eclipse isn't just some file in a dusty warehouse, Nathan. It's the foundation of our family's power, and that power doesn't tolerate loose ends." Nathan's finger hovered over the trigger. He wanted to pull it, to end the nightmare that Richard embodied. But Richard's confidence gave him pause. There was something more, something worse lurking beneath the surface. "What is Project Eclipse?" he demanded. Richard's smile returned. "You wouldn't believe me if I told you." Nathan pressed the barrel harder against his uncle's chest. "Try me." Richard exhaled slowly, almost amused. "Very well. Project Eclipse was a genetic experiment. Partnership, you might say, with some very powerful interests. Isabel was part of it. She was special, unique, and she passed that on to her daughter." Grace's face twisted in confusion. "What are you talking about? Your mother didn't just leave." "Grace," Richard continued, turning his attention to her. "She was taken because she carried something far more valuable than you realize. And now, you're the last piece of that puzzle." Nathan's stomach dropped. "You're lying." "Am I?" Richard spread his arms. "Check the file. It's all there. The tests. The surveillance." Isabel's genetic profile was off the charts, and Grace inherited it. Nathan's mind raced. Genetic experiments, special profiles. It sounded like the ramblings of a madman, but Richard was too methodical, too calculated to fabricate such a wild story. He risked a glance at the open folder. Medical records, lab reports, annotations about cognitive anomalies, and enhanced pattern recognition. There was even a handwritten note. Subject demonstrates heightened situational awareness under stress conditions. Further observation recommended. Grace read the same words and stepped back in horror. This can't be real." "Oh, it's very real, my dear," Richard said, his voice soft and predatory. "And now that you know, they'll come for you, just like they came for your mother." Nathan shifted his aim to Richard's leg and fired. The gunshot exploded in the confined space. Richard collapsed with a shout of pain, clutching his thigh as blood pooled beneath him. "Let's go," Nathan barked, grabbing Grace's arm. They ran from the office, footsteps pounding on the concrete. Behind them, Richard's voice echoed through the warehouse. "You can't outrun this, Nathan. She's already marked." Nathan didn't stop. They burst through the side door into the cool night air. Collins was waiting by the car, weapon drawn. "Get in!" Collins shouted. Nathan shoved Grace into the back seat and dove in after her. Collins floored the accelerator, tires screeching against the asphalt. "What the hell happened in there?" Collins asked, eyes wide in the rearview mirror. "Richard knows everything," Nathan said, breathless. "Grace is the target now." Grace sat curled in the corner, knees drawn to her chest, eyes locked on the horizon. "He said my mom was part of some experiment," she whispered. "He said I'm next." Nathan put a protective arm around her. "We won't let that happen," he said firmly. Collins drove in silence, his expression grim. After 20 minutes, he pulled into an abandoned gas station. "We need a plan," he said, turning off the engine. Nathan leaned forward, mind racing. Richard said this goes beyond him. He mentioned powerful interests. If that's true, killing him won't stop it. "We need to find out who's really pulling the strings." Collins nodded. "I know a guy at a private lab downtown. He might help us decrypt those files." Nathan squeezed Grace's shoulder. "Hey," he said softly. "Look at me." She turned, eyes shimmering with fear. "We're going to figure this out," Nathan promised. "You're not alone in this. We'll get the answers, and we'll stop whoever's behind it." Grace gave a shaky nod. The gas station's flickering light buzzed above them. Nathan glanced toward the road and froze. A black sedan sat at the intersection 100 yards away. The engine idled, exhaust curling into the cold night air. "They found us," Nathan said. The sedan's headlights flashed twice. Collins cursed under his breath and reached for his gun. The sedan's engine roared as it accelerated toward them. "Drive," Nathan shouted. Collins slammed the gear shift into reverse, tires squealing. The sedan picked up speed, headlights glaring like predatory eyes. Grace clung to Nathan as the car hurtled toward them. The sedan's window rolled down. A figure leaned out. Rifle raised, Nathan shoved Grace down just as the first bullets shattered the windshield. The sharp crack of gunfire shattered the night. Glass splintered inward, raining over Nathan and Grace as they ducked beneath the dashboard. The windshield disintegrated in a spiderweb of fractures, the metal frame vibrating with each shot. Collins cursed under his breath and yanked the steering wheel hard to the right. The tires screeched against the cracked pavement as the car swerved into an adjacent alley. "Stay down," Nathan barked. shielding Grace with his body as more bullets struck the side of the car with metallic thuds. His heart pounded in his chest, every instinct screaming danger. The enemy wasn't just trying to intimidate them anymore. This was a kill mission. Collins floored the accelerator. The car shot forward, tires spitting gravel. The black sedan followed, its headlights cutting through the darkness like twin blades. The alley was narrow, flanked by crumbling brick walls. The pursuit left little room for mistakes. "They're too close," Collins growled, eyes flicking to the rearview mirror. "Keep going," Nathan said. His mind raced for a solution. The enemy was relentless, coordinated, and clearly well-funded. Richard Steele had set this in motion. But someone else was orchestrating the moves now. Someone who wanted Grace, or perhaps the knowledge locked in her DNA. Grace clung to Nathan's arm. Her breathing came in quick, shallow gasps. She was terrified, and he couldn't blame her. In a matter of days, her world had been turned into a nightmare of secrets, chases, and gunfire. Nathan wanted to tell her it would all be okay, but the truth was, he wasn't sure of anything anymore. Ahead, the alley split into two paths. Collins hesitated for a split second. "Left," Nathan shouted. Collins obeyed, yanking the wheel. The car skidded around the corner, rear tires momentarily losing traction. The sedan followed but swung too wide, scraping against the brick wall with a metallic screech. Sparks sprayed into the night air, giving them a few precious seconds of lead. "Where does this lead?" Grace asked, her voice strained. "Industrial sector," Collins answered, navigating through the maze of deserted streets. "Old shipping yards. If we make it to the docks, we might lose them." Nathan nodded, gripping the door handle as Collins took another sharp turn. The engine groaned in protest, but the car held together. Behind them, the sedan reappeared, its headlights flickering through the haze of dust and debris. "They're not giving up," Nathan muttered. "They don't need to," Collins replied grimly. "They're professionals. We're rats in a maze. They're just waiting for us to run out of road." The industrial district loomed ahead, a skeleton of abandoned cranes and rusting warehouses along the waterfront. Collins cut the headlights and slowed, weaving between rusted shipping containers. The tires crunched softly over gravel as he guided the car into the shadows of a massive crane. "Everybody out," Collins ordered. Nathan opened the door carefully, scanning the area. Grace followed, sticking close to his side. Collins pulled a duffel bag from the trunk and unzipped it, revealing 2 pistols and a compact rifle. "You've been busy," Nathan said. "Never trust a Steele to play fair," Collins said, handing him a pistol, "especially when it comes to family." They crouched beside a container, breathing heavily. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the distant lapping of water against the pier. Grace's hands trembled. Nathan placed a hand on her shoulder. "We'll get through this," he whispered. She gave a weak nod, but her eyes remained locked on the darkness. Minutes passed. Then came the sound they dreaded. The low hum of an approaching engine. Headlights swept across the container maze, bouncing off metal surfaces in eerie, disjointed patterns. "Here they come," Collins murmured, raising the rifle. The black sedan crept down the main access road, moving slowly now. Its headlights switched to high beams, casting sharp, blinding cones of light into every crevice. Nathan's muscles tensed. They weren't searching blindly. They were hurting them. The car stopped about 20 yards away. The driver's door opened and a man stepped out. He wore dark clothes and moved with military precision. His face was shadowed beneath a cap, but his posture exuded confidence. He held a rifle casually across his chest. "Mr. Steele," the man called, voice amplified by the silence. "Come out. We just want the girl. You don't have to die tonight." Nathan felt Grace stiffen. He squeezed her shoulder reassuringly. "You have 10 seconds, the man continued. "After that, we stop being polite." Collins raised the rifle, finger poised on the trigger. "Wait," Nathan said. "He wants to talk. Let's find out why." "You can't be serious," Collins hissed. "Just cover me." Nathan stood slowly, keeping the pistol low but ready. The man's head tilted slightly as Nathan stepped into the open. "That's better," the man said, smiling faintly. "You always were a reasonable man, Mr. Steele." "Who are you?" Nathan demanded. "Just a messenger," the man said. "But my employers are quite interested in Grace Bennett. She has potential." "Why?" The man shrugged. That's above my pay grade. But if you hand her over, no one gets hurt. She'll be treated well, studied, protected. Nathan's stomach twisted. Like her mother was. The man's smile faltered. Isabel was a necessary sacrifice, but your daughter could be different. She could be part of something extraordinary. Nathan's finger tightened on the trigger. You took Isabel from me. You won't get Grace. The man sighed. Disappointing. He raised his rifle. Before Nathan could react, Collins fired. The shot echoed like a cannon blast. The man's body jerked backward, collapsing into the gravel. Move! Nathan shouted. Grace sprinted with him toward the waterfront. Behind them, more figures emerged from the sedan and surrounding shadows. Weapons blazing. Bullets ricocheted off containers, sending sparks flying. Nathan led Grace toward a stack of crates near the pier's edge. We're trapped, she gasped. Nathan's eyes darted to the water. Can you swim? What? Can you swim? He repeated urgently. Yes, but no time. Jump. He grabbed her hand and launched them both off the pier. The icy water closed over their heads with a punishing shock. Nathan kicked hard, pulling Grace toward the surface. Gunshots peppered the water around them. He spotted a half-submerged dock piling and swam toward it. Grace clung to his arm, coughing as they reached the wooden beam. The shooters reached the edge of the pier, flashlights scanning the water. Nathan held Grace close, pressing a finger to his lips. The beams of light swept over them once, twice, then moved away. They stayed hidden until the lights disappeared. Finally, Grace whispered, "What do they want from me?" Nathan's jaw tightened. "I don't know, but whatever it is, we won't let them get it." He glanced back toward the pier, where the black sedan still idled. Through the shattered windshield, he saw the dead man's body slumped over the dashboard. And on the dashboard, placed deliberately next to the corpse's hand, was a phone with the screen illuminated. A single message glowed on the screen. "We always get what we want." The cold water clung to their skin like icy tendrils, as Nathan Steele and Grace Bennett gripped the barnacle-encrusted piling beneath the pier. The tide lapped against the wood with soft, rhythmic splashes, masking their frantic breathing. Darkness enveloped them, broken only by the faint, sweeping glow of flashlights on the dock above. Nathan's muscles ached from holding Grace close, but he didn't dare let go. The black sedan still sat near the edge of the pier, headlights cutting twin beams across the surface of the water. The dead man's body remained slumped inside, head twisted unnaturally toward the window. But it wasn't the corpse that unnerved Nathan. It was the phone beside the body, screen glowing like an eerie lighthouse. The message was clear. We always get what we want. The enemy was patient. They were confident. And they were watching. Nathan's mind raced. Richard had mentioned powerful interests behind Project Eclipse, and this ambush confirmed it. Richard wasn't acting alone. There was something bigger at play, something sinister that had driven Isabel into hiding and was now coming for Grace. The beam of a flashlight swept toward their hiding place. Nathan tightened his grip on Grace and pressed his back against the piling. The cold from the water seeped through his clothes and into his bones. The light hovered for a moment, then shifted away. "They're leaving," Grace whispered against his chest. "Not yet," Nathan said softly, barely moving his lips. "They're just making us think they are." True enough. The sedan's engine rumbled to life. It reversed slowly, turning toward the exit of the shipping yard. The headlights dimmed as the car disappeared into the distance. Silence returned to the pier. Nathan exhaled and loosened his grip. Grace shivered violently, her teeth chattering. The adrenaline that had carried them through the chase was draining away, leaving exhaustion in its wake. "Come on," Nathan said. "We need to get out of the water before hypothermia sets in." He guided her to the nearest ladder and helped her climb onto the slick wooden planks. Once on solid ground, Grace collapsed to her knees, gasping for breath. Nathan crouched beside her and rubbed her arms to generate warmth. I can't feel my fingers," she said through clenched teeth. "That's the cold talking. We'll get you warmed up." He surveyed their surroundings. The dock was deserted, the air thick with salt and the faint metallic tang of rust. In the distance, a line of abandoned warehouses stretched along the waterfront. One of them, Nathan remembered, had once been used by his father for shipping operations. "We need to get to that warehouse," he said, pointing toward the furthest structure. "It should still have a maintenance room. Maybe some dry clothes. Grace nodded, teeth still chattering. They moved quickly, sticking to the shadows. Nathan's senses stayed on high alert, scanning every corner and listening for the faintest sound of footsteps or approaching engines. By the time they reached the old warehouse, Grace was stumbling from exhaustion. Nathan forced open the rusted side door and guided her inside. The interior was a cavern of shadows and forgotten equipment. Massive metal shelves loomed above them, their contents long since removed. The faint odor of oil and mildew hung in the air. Nathan found the maintenance room in the back. A battered metal locker stood against the wall. He pried it open and found 2 faded coveralls and a stack of old towels. "Here," he said, tossing one of the towels to Grace. "Dry off first." She accepted it with shaky hands. Nathan turned away to give her privacy, while he stripped off his soaked clothes and pulled on one of the coveralls. The material was stiff and smelled of stale grease, but it was dry. Grace followed suit, slipping into the oversized coverall and wrapping her arms around herself for warmth. "Better?" Nathan asked. "A little," she said, voice still fragile. "Thanks." He sat beside her on the cold concrete floor. The dim glow from a dusty window above cast their shadows long across the wall. "What did Richard mean about me?" Grace asked after a long silence. "Why would he say I'm special?" Nathan ran a hand through his damp hair. "I don't know," he admitted. "But from what we saw in that file, your mom was part of some experiment. And now, whoever's behind it thinks you might have inherited whatever made her unique. But why? What did she have that was so important?" Nathan shook his head. "We'll find out. But right now, we need to stay ahead of them." Grace nodded, though uncertainty clouded her eyes. A faint noise echoed from outside. Footsteps on gravel. Nathan's body went rigid. He placed a finger to his lips and rose, moving silently toward the window. Peeking out, he saw 2 figures approaching the warehouse. Both were dressed in dark tactical gear, rifles slung across their chests. Nathan ducked down. "They're here." Grace's eyes widened. "How did they find us so fast?" "Probably tracked my phone," Nathan muttered, cursing himself for the oversight. He pulled the device from his pocket and smashed it against the concrete. The footsteps drew closer. The intruders stopped just outside the door. Nathan scanned the room. There was only one exit. The main entrance where their pursuers waited. The windows were too high and too narrow to escape through. They were cornered. The door handle rattled. Nathan motioned for Grace to move behind a stack of old crates. He crouched beside her, raising his pistol. His heart thudded in his chest. If they came through the door, he'd have 1 or 2 shots before they'd be overwhelmed. The door creaked open. The first figure stepped inside, sweeping the room with a flashlight. The beam passed over the crates and paused. Nathan fired. The man grunted and fell backward. The second figure returned fire. Bullets tore into the crates. Sending splinters flying, Nathan pulled Grace toward the maintenance room. "Go, go," he shouted. They dashed into the small space, slamming the metal door behind them. Nathan locked it, but the thin door wouldn't hold for long. Grace pointed to the air vent near the ceiling. "We can get out through there." Nathan dragged an old toolbox beneath the vent. Grace climbed up, struggling to pry off the rusted grate. Outside, footsteps pounded toward the door. "Hurry," Nathan urged. The vent cover gave way with a screech. Grace scrambled into the shaft. Nathan followed, squeezing his shoulders through the narrow opening just as the door exploded inward with a deafening crash. They crawled through the metal tunnel, the echoes of their pursuers' shouts following them. After several agonizing minutes, the vent opened onto the roof. Nathan helped Grace out and scanned the area. Below, more black sedans flooded into the yard. Men in dark uniforms spread out, weapons ready. They were surrounded. "What do we do now?" Grace whispered, eyes wide with panic. Nathan's gaze fell on the harbor below. A cargo ship sat at the dock, its engines idling softly. "We jump again," he said. Grace hesitated for half a second before nodding. They sprinted to the edge of the roof. "Now!" Nathan shouted. They leaped. The wind roared in their ears, and then they hit the freezing water once more. As Nathan surfaced, gasping for air, he heard the sharp crack of a rifle. A bullet grazed his arm, sending a jolt of pain through his body. He kicked harder, pulling Grace toward the shadow of the cargo ship. Behind them, the men shouted into radios. "Target escaped!" One voice crackled. "But we tagged the girl. "We have a tracker. We'll find them again soon." The freezing water closed over Nathan Steele's head as he pulled Grace beneath the surface. The sharp sting of the bullet graze on his arm throbbed with each stroke. But adrenaline kept the pain at bay. Above them, searchlights swept across the harbor, beams slicing through the mist like blades searching for prey. The men on the pier shouted into radios, voices crackling with urgency. "The girl is tagged. We have a signal. She won't get far." Nathan's heart seized. A tracker. That explained how they'd found them so quickly. Grace had been marked without their knowledge. Somehow, in the chaos of the ambush, they'd implanted a tracking device on her. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. She wasn't just being hunted. She'd become the target of a meticulously planned operation. He kicked harder, dragging her toward the hull of the cargo ship anchored nearby. The cold bit into his limbs, but he didn't slow. Grace clung to his arm, teeth chattering uncontrollably. They reached the ship's hull and surfaced in its shadow. The metal was slick and coated with algae, but Nathan found a thick mooring rope dangling into the water. "Climb," he whispered, guiding Grace toward the rope. She hesitated, breathless and trembling. I can't." "Yes, you can," he said, voice firm but gentle. "We don't have a choice." With a whimper, Grace latched onto the rope and began ascending. Nathan followed, ignoring the burn in his muscles. The waterlogged coveralls clung to his skin, doubling the effort, but he pushed through it. Gunfire erupted from the pier. Bullets pinged against the ship's hull, sending sharp metallic echoes through the night. Nathan climbed faster, shielding Grace as best he could by the time they reached the deck. His lungs burned, and his arm throbbed with fiery intensity. They collapsed behind a stack of crates. Nathan peeked over the edge. The searchlights swept across the water, now focused on the ship. "They know we're here," he muttered. Grace huddled beside him, shivering violently. Her lips were pale, and her breathing was erratic. Hypothermia was setting in. Nathan scanned the deck. The cargo ship was massive, lined with containers stacked 3 high. A few lights glowed from the bridge, suggesting a skeleton crew. They needed to hide, but first, he had to find the tracker. "Grace," he said softly, "they tagged you, probably during the cabin ambush. We need to find it and get rid of it." Her eyes widened. "How? Where?" "Could be anywhere. A micro-implant under the skin. We need to search." She nodded, pulling her sleeve up with trembling hands. Nathan examined her arms first, feeling for any unusual bumps or tenderness. Nothing. He moved to her neck, then along her jawline. His fingers paused just behind her left ear. "Here," he said. Beneath the skin was a tiny, hard lump no larger than a grain of rice. Grace's breath caught. "They did that to me without me knowing." Nathan clenched his jaw. "Yeah, but we'll fix it." He retrieved a pocket knife from his soaked pants and unfolded the small, sharp blade. "This is going to hurt," he warned. "Just do it," she whispered, voice tight. Nathan took a deep breath. With one hand, he steadied her head. With the other, he pressed the tip of the blade against the skin behind her ear and made a shallow incision. Grace bit her lip, her body rigid with pain. Blood trickled down her neck. Nathan dug gently until the blade hit something solid. A small metallic capsule. "There it is," he said, extracting the tiny device. He held the microchip between his fingers. A faint red light blinked from its surface. "They're tracking that," Grace said, breathless. Not for much longer. Nathan flicked the device into the water below. For several seconds, they just sat there, breathing heavily. Grace wiped the tears from her cheeks, leaving a smear of blood in their place. "They know where we are," she said. "They'll come for us again." Nathan nodded. "Yeah, but we bought ourselves some time. They needed a plan. And fast. The men hunting them weren't amateurs. They were methodical, well-equipped, and relentless. Whoever was behind this operation had resources and information Nathan hadn't even known existed. The file labeled Project Eclipse haunted him. Genetic experiments, surveillance spanning decades, and references to Isabel as a viable subject. Now Grace was their target. Why? What made her so valuable? "Come on," Nathan said, helping Grace to her feet. "Let's find the crew." They crept along the deck, moving between containers. The cold wind sliced through their wet clothes, stealing what little warmth remained. Near the bridge, they found a narrow door slightly ajar. Nathan pushed it open. The control room was dimly lit. 2 men sat in front of the instrument panels. Both were slouched in their seats, heads tilted unnaturally to one side. Nathan's stomach dropped. He moved closer and saw the thin red lines across their throats. Blood pooled on the floor beneath their chairs. Grace stifled a gasp. "They're already here." A metallic click sounded behind them. "Don't move," said a voice. Nathan turned slowly. A woman stood in the doorway, aiming a pistol at his chest. She wore black tactical gear, hair pulled into a tight bun. Her expression was calm, almost disinterested. "Hands where I can see them," she ordered. Nathan raised his hands. Grace followed. The woman stepped into the room. "Nathan Steele, Grace Bennett." She smiled faintly. "You've given us quite the chase." "Who the hell are you?" Nathan demanded. "Just an employee," she said. "But you can call me Agent Keller. And who do you work for?" Keller's smile didn't falter. "You wouldn't understand, even if I told you." Nathan's eyes darted around the room, searching for a weapon, an escape, anything. "Don't bother," Keller said. "The ship's surrounded and you're unarmed." Her gaze shifted to Grace. "You're more trouble than we anticipated, Grace, but that ends tonight." "Why me?" Grace's voice cracked. "Because you're special," Keller said. "Just like your mother. And now it's time to finish what Isabel started." Nathan lunged forward. Keller fired. The shot echoed in the cramped space. Nathan felt the searing pain as the bullet tore through his side. He collapsed to the floor with a grunt. "Dad!" Grace screamed, dropping beside him. Nathan clutched the wound. Blood soaked through his fingers, his vision blurred, but he forced himself to stay conscious. "Don't worry," Keller said, stepping closer. "He won't die. Yet, we need him to cooperate first." Grace's eyes blazed with terror and fury as Keller grabbed her by the arm. "Let her go," Nathan growled, trying to push himself up. Keller bent down and smiled. "You'll see her again eventually." She dragged Grace from the room. Nathan reached for the pistol strapped to Keller's belt as she passed, but she kicked his injured side, driving the air from his lungs. Darkness swallowed his vision. The last thing he heard was Grace's voice, shrieking his name as she was taken. Nathan Steele woke to the sharp, metallic scent of blood, and the dull ache of his body sprawled across the cold floor. His side burned like molten metal where the bullet had torn through flesh, and every breath sent fresh waves of pain through his ribs. For a moment, confusion clouded his thoughts. Then the memory slammed into him like a sledgehammer. The shot, Keller's icy voice, Grace's terrified screams. Grace was gone. The thought hit harder than the bullet wound. His daughter, the daughter he hadn't even known existed a week ago, had been taken, just like Isabel had been. The predators behind Project Eclipse had her now, and if history repeated itself, she wouldn't survive. Nathan groaned and pushed himself onto his elbows. The floor beneath him was slick with his own blood. His vision swam, but he forced himself upright, leaning heavily against the metal control console. The dead crew members stared blankly at the ceiling, silent witnesses to his failure. "I can't lose her." The words looped through his mind like a desperate mantra. He pressed a hand against the gunshot wound. Warm, sticky blood oozed through his fingers. He needed medical attention, but there was no time. Grace's captors were professionals. Every passing minute widened the gap between them. Nathan scanned the room for something useful. The crew's radios were smashed. The ship's navigation system was dead, its wires neatly severed. Whoever these people were, they knew how to cover their tracks. His gaze landed on a small laptop on the auxiliary desk. The screen was cracked but still flickering faintly. Nathan limped toward it and tapped the keyboard. A GPS interface appeared, showing the ship's last logged coordinates and nearby vessel movements. He toggled through recent activity. One ship had departed less than 10 minutes earlier. A small, unregistered vessel heading northeast at high speed. "That's them," Nathan muttered. He tore the hard drive from the laptop and shoved it into his pocket. Then he grabbed a roll of duct tape from a supply shelf, tore a long strip, and pressed it over his wound with a grimace. It wasn't much, but it would slow the bleeding. The pain sharpened with each step as he descended the ship's gangway and stumbled along the dock. The harbor was deserted now, the enemy's vehicles long gone. A lone payphone stood near the pier entrance, a relic from a bygone era. He fumbled coins from his pocket and dialed Collins's number. The line rang once, twice. "Collins," came the voice, tight and alert. "They took Grace." Nathan rasped, "Shit, where are you?" "South Harbor docks. I have a lead. A ship." "Heading northeast. Need backup." "I'm on my way," Collins said. "Hold tight." Nathan hung up and slumped against the phone booth. His head swam from blood loss. Minutes passed in a blur until headlights splashed across the pavement. Collins's car screeched to a stop and the door flew open. "Jesus." "Nathan," Collins said, eyes widening as he saw the blood. "Let me get you to a hospital." "No time," Nathan said, forcing himself into the passenger seat. "Grace is all that matters." Collins hesitated, then nodded and peeled away from the curb. "Tell me what you've got." Nathan handed him the hard drive. "The ship they took her on. Track it." Collins plugged the device into a portable terminal mounted in the dashboard. The screen lit up, data scrolling across it. "Got it," Collins said. "They're heading toward Ravenwood Island." Nathan's stomach turned. "That place has been abandoned for decades, old military site." "Exactly," Collins said. "The perfect place to run a secret operation." Nathan checked the pistol tucked into the glove compartment. "How long until we get there?" 2 hours if we push it." "Push it." The car surged forward, tires squealing. Nathan leaned his head against the window, jaw clenched. Every second that passed felt like an eternity. "These people," he said softly. "They killed Isabel. Now they want Grace. Why?" Collins drummed his fingers on the steering wheel. "You said something about a genetic experiment, right?" Nathan nodded. "Project Eclipse. The file said Isabel had some kind of unique genetic profile, enhanced pattern recognition or something like that. And Grace inherited it," Collins said. "Which makes her valuable." Nathan's grip tightened around the pistol. "They're not going to use her, or kill her. Not while I'm breathing." The car flew down the coastal highway, headlights slicing through the darkness. The minutes bled together as Nathan wrestled with his own guilt. He'd spent decades building a corporate empire, believing power and control were the ultimate shields against the chaos of life. But when it truly mattered, when Grace needed him most, he had been powerless. "We're close," Collins said, snapping Nathan from his thoughts. "There's a service road that leads to an old watchtower on the island. We go in from there." They parked half a mile from the tower and approached on foot. The air was thick with salt and damp earth. Fog rolled in from the water, curling around the skeletal remains of old barracks and watchtowers. Collins raised binoculars. Got movement near the main bunker. 3 guards, patrolling in pairs. Nathan scanned the area. The bunker sat at the center of the compound, its concrete walls stained with decades of neglect. A faint glow emanated from narrow, reinforced windows. "That's where they have her," Nathan said. Collins handed him a silencer. "Let's get her back." They moved through the shadows, circling toward the bunker's rear entrance. Nathan's wound throbbed with each step. But the pain kept him sharp. The memory of Grace's terrified face pushed him forward. 2 guards appeared around the corner. Nathan dropped into a crouch. The men wore black tactical gear identical to Keller's. One held a suppressed rifle. The other scanned the area with a thermal scope. Nathan signaled Collins. They moved simultaneously. Collins took the one on the right, Nathan the left. The guards crumpled silently to the ground. Nathan grabbed the rifle and earpiece from his target. A voice crackled through the comm. "Unit 3, status check." Nathan pressed the talk button and imitated the guard's voice. "Clear. No movement on the perimeter." "Copy that." They slipped inside the bunker through a rusted maintenance door. The interior smelled of bleach and antiseptic. Footsteps echoed from deeper within. Collins gestured toward a staircase. Nathan nodded, and they ascended, keeping low at the top. They found a room lined with monitors displaying live feeds from security cameras. Nathan's heart clenched when he saw Grace on one of the screens. She was strapped to a metal chair in the center of a sterile room. Electrodes were attached to her temples. Her head hung low, hair matted with sweat. Keller stood beside her, speaking into a microphone. Grace's face twisted in pain. "Initiate phase 2, Keller said to someone off camera. Grace convulsed. Her scream pierced through the speakers. Nathan's vision went red. "She's torturing her," he whispered. Collins swore under his breath. "Let's move." They exited the control room and followed the hallway toward the testing chamber. Nathan's heart pounded as Grace's screams echoed through the concrete walls. The door was locked. Collins planted explosives along the hinges. "Ready?" Collins asked. "Do it," Nathan said. The explosion reverberated through the bunker. The door blew inward. Smoke filled the corridor. Nathan charged in, gun raised. "Step away from her," he roared. Keller turned, eyes narrowing. "You're persistent, Nathan, but you're too late." Grace sagged in the chair, barely conscious. Nathan aimed at Keller's forehead. "Let her go." Keller smiled. "You have no idea what she really is, do you?" Nathan's finger tightened on the trigger. "She's my daughter." "She's more than that," Keller said. "She's the key to everything." Nathan fired. The bullet struck Keller in the shoulder. She staggered backward but didn't fall. With her free hand, she pressed a switch on a nearby panel. "Goodbye, Nathan," she hissed. The ground shuddered beneath them. An automated voice crackled through the intercom. "Facility self-destruct initiated. Countdown commencing. 5 minutes." Collins rushed to Grace, cutting the straps. Nathan grabbed her as she slumped forward. "Can you walk?" he asked. Grace's eyes fluttered open. "Dad, I'm here, sweetheart," he said, voice breaking. "We're getting out of here." He scooped her into his arms and turned toward the exit. Behind them, Keller staggered to her feet, blood staining her uniform. Her lips curled into a cold smile. "You can't stop it," she called. "This is bigger than you." Nathan didn't look back. He ran. Grace cradled against his chest as the timer on the wall ticked down to destruction. The bunker walls trembled with each passing second, groaning under the strain of the impending explosion. The mechanical voice echoed through the corridors, its calm monotone a stark contrast to the chaos unfolding. Facility self-destruct initiated. 4 minutes and 30 seconds remaining. Nathan Steele cradled Grace in his arms as he sprinted through the dimly lit hallway. His injured side screamed with every step, the pain sharp and unrelenting. Blood seeped through the makeshift duct tape bandage, but adrenaline kept his legs moving. Grace's head lolled against his chest, her breath shallow. The electrodes had left faint burns on her temples, and her skin was clammy and cold. Collins ran ahead, rifle raised, eyes scanning every intersection. The air was thick with the metallic tang of explosives primed to detonate. Overhead lights flickered erratically, casting jagged shadows that danced like specters along the concrete walls. "Stairs," Collins barked, pointing to a metal staircase at the end of the hall. Nathan's grip tightened around Grace as he pushed forward. His boots slipped on the slick floor, but he caught himself against the wall and kept going. Collins reached the stairs first, taking them 2 at a time. Nathan followed, the metal steps rattling beneath their weight. The mechanical voice spoke again. 4 minutes remaining. As they reached the top landing, a low rumble shook the ground. Dust cascaded from the ceiling. Behind them, the corridor they had just left collapsed in a deafening roar. Concrete and rebar crumbled into a twisted mess of debris. "We're running out of time," Nathan panted. "Almost there," Collins said, leading the way through a narrow passage. The corridor opened into a cavernous loading bay. On the far side, sunlight filtered through a partially raised steel door that led to the outside. Relief surged through Nathan, but it was short-lived. Shadows moved near the exit. 3 figures in tactical gear stepped into view, rifles raised. Their black helmets bore the same insignia Nathan had seen on Keller's uniform, a stylized eclipse with a serpent coiled around it. "Down!" Collins shouted. He dove behind a forklift and opened fire. Nathan ducked behind a crate, shielding Grace with his body. Bullets ricocheted off the concrete floor, sparking against the metal equipment scattered around the bay. "We don't have time for this," Nathan shouted. Collins reloaded. "I'll cover you. Get her out." "No," Nathan protested. "Go, damn it," Collins said. He popped up, firing a burst toward the guards. One dropped with a grunt. The other 2 ducked behind a shipping container. Nathan hesitated for a fraction of a second, then ran. He sprinted toward the half-open door, Grace's weight making his injured side scream in protest. The open air beyond the threshold seemed impossibly far away. A bullet whizzed past his ear. Another struck a metal support beam beside him with a sharp ping. He didn't stop. His vision tunneled, focusing solely on the strip of light marking the exit. He slid the last few feet, ducking beneath the steel door. Sunlight hit his face like a slap. The cold sea air stung his skin. He stumbled to his feet and looked around. A rusted jeep sat abandoned near a cluster of fuel barrels. Grace stirred against his chest. "Dad," she whispered. "I've got you, sweetheart," Nathan said, voice cracking. "Just hold on." He reached the jeep and eased her into the passenger seat. The keys dangled from the ignition. Luck, or maybe the universe giving him one last chance. He turned the key. The engine sputtered, coughed, then roared to life. The building behind them shook with another explosion. Nathan gripped the wheel. "Come on, Collins," he muttered through the shattered windshield. He saw Collins sprinting toward the exit. The remaining guards pursued him, firing relentlessly. Collins turned mid-stride and fired back, hitting one. The other lunged forward, raising his rifle. "No!" Nathan shouted. The guard fired. The bullet struck Collins in the chest. He collapsed, hitting the ground hard. The guard raised his weapon again for a kill shot. Nathan slammed his foot on the accelerator. The jeep lurched forward, tires spinning on the gravel. The guard turned just as the vehicle barreled into him, flinging his body like a rag doll against the concrete wall. Nathan skidded to a stop beside Collins and jumped out. Blood pooled beneath his friend. "Collins," Nathan said, dropping to his knees. Collins coughed, crimson bubbling from his lips. "Go," he gasped. "Take her. Get out of here." "I'm not leaving you." Collins gave a weak smile. "I'm already gone, buddy. Save your daughter." Tears burned Nathan's eyes. He gripped Collins's hand. "Thank you," he whispered. "Make it count," Collins rasped. His eyes glazed over. The grip on Nathan's hand slackened. The ground beneath them trembled violently. 2 minutes remaining. Nathan stood, chest heaving. He climbed back into the jeep and threw it into gear. The tires squealed as they tore away from the facility. In the rearview mirror, he saw the bunker collapsing, the concrete structure imploding inward. Grace groaned beside him. Nathan reached across the seat and squeezed her hand. "I'm here," he said. "We're safe for now." The jeep bumped along a dirt road leading away from the compound. Trees blurred past on either side. Nathan's body screamed for rest, but he kept his foot pressed to the gas pedal. The explosion came a moment later. A deafening roar split the air. The ground shook, and a shockwave lifted the rear of the jeep momentarily before slamming it back down. Nathan fought to maintain control. In the mirror, a column of fire shot into the sky as the facility was reduced to rubble. The force of the blast shattered the jeep's back window. Glass rained down on them. Nathan clenched his jaw and kept driving. Miles later, when the forest thinned and the road met the main highway, he finally eased off the gas. His body sagged against the seat. Grace stirred, her eyes fluttering open. "Dad," she said, voice faint. "I'm here," Nathan said. Where are we?" "Far enough," Nathan replied. Though he wasn't sure if it was true, he glanced at his reflection in the rearview mirror. Blood smeared his face. His skin was pale, his eyes hollow. Grace touched the raw skin on her temples. "They did something to me," she whispered. Nathan's hands tightened on the wheel. "I know, but we'll figure it out. Together." Her eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "Why me?" "Because of your mom," Nathan said. "And because of something in your DNA. But none of that matters. You're not just some experiment. You're my daughter, and I swear I won't let them take you again." Grace leaned against him, exhausted. Nathan drove in silence, mind spinning. Richard Steele was the tip of a much larger iceberg. Project Eclipse had reach, resources, and a level of scientific sophistication far beyond anything Nathan had imagined. They needed help, and he knew just the person to call. He pulled into a gas station and used a disposable phone to dial a secure number he hadn't used in years. It rang twice before a voice answered. "Who the hell is this?" A gruff voice demanded. "It's Nathan Steele," he said. "I need your help." "Reyes, they're after my daughter." Silence on the other end. Then, "Where are you?" Nathan gave the coordinates. "Stay put," Reyes said. "And watch your back. If they've marked her, this won't stop until they have what they want." Nathan ended the call. He sat back, heart pounding. Grace slept beside him. Face pale, brow furrowed in troubled dreams, Nathan stroked her hair. "Hang on, baby," he whispered. "We're just getting started." He looked out at the dark road ahead, knowing the storm hadn't passed. It had only just begun. Nathan Steele sat behind the wheel of the battered Jeep, watching the empty road through the cracked windshield. The distant hum of passing trucks faded into the night, leaving only the soft rasp of Grace's breathing beside him. She slept fitfully, her head resting against his shoulder. Even in sleep, her brow remained furrowed, her body tense as though her subconscious still braced for danger. Nathan's pulse drummed a steady rhythm of exhaustion and dread. The image of Grace strapped to that metal chair haunted him. The electrodes, the screams, the cold satisfaction on Keller's face as she initiated the procedure. "She's more than your daughter. She's the key to everything." The words echoed relentlessly. What had Keller meant, and what had they done to Grace? Headlights appeared in the rearview mirror. Nathan's fingers tightened on the pistol resting on his thigh. The car approached slowly, stopping at the edge of the gas station lot. The engine idled for several seconds before the driver's door opened. A man stepped out, tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in dark jeans and a leather jacket. His silhouette was familiar even after all these years. Nathan opened the door and stepped out, gun raised. "Reyes?" he said. The man stopped beneath the flickering overhead light. Deep lines creased his face, and his dark eyes flicked toward the pistol with mild amusement. "You gonna shoot me, Steele?" Reyes asked, voice gravelly as ever. "Maybe," Nathan said. "Depends on your answers." Reyes lifted his hands in mock surrender. Same old Nathan, paranoid as hell. He nodded toward the Jeep. "That her?" "Yeah," Nathan said. "That's Grace." Reyes's expression shifted to something more serious. "She looks just like Isabel." Nathan's throat tightened. "Yeah. She okay?" "No," Nathan said. "They did something to her. Something connected to Project Eclipse." Reyes's jaw clenched. "Damn, thought that nightmare was buried with your uncle." Nathan's stomach dropped. "You know about Eclipse." "Enough to know it was bad news," Reyes said. "Your uncle didn't build his empire with clever investments alone. He partnered with some very dangerous people. Genetic manipulation, cognitive experiments. Isabel got caught in the middle of it." Nathan's pulse spiked. "And Grace?" Reyes shifted uncomfortably. "We need to get somewhere safe. I know a place." "Follow me." Nathan hesitated, instinct screaming to distrust everyone. But Reyes had been a friend once, one of the few people who'd warned him about Richard's growing obsession with control. He lowered the gun, returned to the Jeep, and gently shook Grace awake. "Hey, sweetheart," he said softly. "We're moving again." Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused at first. "Where? Someone who can help us," Nathan said. "Just hold on a little longer." She nodded weakly. They followed Reyes through the dark countryside until they reached a small cabin nestled at the edge of a dense forest. Reyes parked his car behind a thick hedge. Nathan did the same. The air smelled of pine and wet earth as they stepped out. The cabin's interior was Spartan: a worn couch, a coffee table scarred by cigarette burns, and a desk cluttered with papers and electronic devices. Reyes gestured for Grace to sit. "There's a med kit in the bathroom," he said. "Clean yourself up." Nathan handed her a towel. Grace disappeared into the bathroom without a word. "Talk," Nathan demanded the moment the door closed. Reyes rubbed the back of his neck. "Look, I don't know everything, but I knew your uncle was involved in something big. He funneled millions into research facilities across the globe. Project Eclipse was one of those programs. Its goal was to create individuals with enhanced cognitive abilities, people who could see patterns, solve problems, and predict behaviors faster than anyone else. Like Isabel," Nathan said. Reyes nodded. "Exactly. She was their first breakthrough. Her mind worked differently. She could analyze situations instinctively, process complex information without effort, but she never wanted to be part of it. When she got pregnant, she ran. Why was Grace targeted? Because she inherited those abilities," Reyes said grimly. "The gene passed from Isabel to her. But they didn't just want to study Grace. They wanted to activate her full potential. That's what they were doing when you found her in that lab." Nathan's stomach turned. "Activate how?" "By stimulating the parts of her brain responsible for advanced pattern recognition. The pain wasn't just torture. It was part of the process. They were essentially rewiring her neural pathways to awaken dormant capabilities." Nathan clenched his fists. "And what happens if they succeed?" "She becomes a living weapon," Reyes said. Imagine someone who can predict market shifts, military strategies, and political movements before they happen. Grace could become that, or worse. Worse how? Pattern recognition isn't just about logic. It taps into intuition, emotion, and memory. If pushed too far, her mind could fragment. She'd lose touch with reality. Nathan rubbed his temples. And now they know she exists. They won't stop, Reyes said. Not until they have her or she's dead. The bathroom door creaked open. Grace stepped out, face pale but determined. I heard, she said. Nathan stood. Grace, I'm not running anymore, she said. If they want me, let's make them regret it. Nathan's heart swelled with pride and fear. You don't have to fight this battle. Yes, I do, she said. They killed my mom. They tortured me. I won't let them win. Reyes whistled softly. She's got Isabel's fire. Nathan nodded, pride warring with dread. Okay, he said. Then we fight back. Reyes opened his laptop and pulled up a file directory. I've been monitoring encrypted communications related to Eclipse. After you escaped the bunker, chatter spiked. They're regrouping at a site in Chicago, an old corporate lab once owned by Steele Industries. Chicago, Nathan muttered. His company had dozens of properties there, including a high-security R&D facility. That's their nerve center. Exactly, Reyes said. They're probably preparing to resume Grace's activation. But now they know you're a threat. Security will be tight. Nathan's mind raced. The enemy was powerful, but power bred arrogance, and that arrogance could be exploited. We hit them hard, Nathan said. We go to that lab, destroy everything, and make sure they can't touch Grace again. Grace sat beside him. I want to help. Nathan cupped her face. You already are, sweetheart, but you need to stay sharp. They're after your mind. If you start feeling different, tell me immediately. She nodded, though fear flickered in her eyes. Reyes handed Nathan a pistol. We've got one shot at this. If we fail, they win. Nathan accepted the weapon and met his old friend's gaze. Then we don't fail. The cabin fell into silence. Outside, the wind stirred the trees like a whispered warning. The fight wasn't over. It was just beginning. Nathan hugged Grace, his jaw tight. They were stepping into the lion's den. And this time, there was no turning back. The night air was crisp and unforgiving as Nathan Steele guided the car through the empty streets of Chicago. The skyline loomed like a steel and glass fortress, each glowing window a potential eye watching their approach. Grace sat in the back seat, eyes fixed on the illuminated cityscape, while Reyes navigated beside Nathan, laptop balanced on his knees. The lab's located in an old Steele Industries R&D facility on Wabash Avenue, Reyes said, tapping on the keyboard. I've intercepted encrypted comms. They're prepping for Phase 3. Nathan's grip on the steering wheel tightened. What does that mean? Reyes exhaled sharply. Phase 1 was tracking Grace. Phase 2 was initiating the cognitive activation. Phase 3. It's the final stage. Grace leaned forward. What happens if they finish it? Her neural pathways will become hyperactive, Reyes explained. Her brain will start identifying complex patterns automatically, but the strain could cause cognitive collapse if she isn't stabilized. Or, Nathan added, voice grim, they get their super weapon and she loses herself. Reyes nodded. Exactly. Nathan swore under his breath and made a sharp right turn, the tires skidding slightly on the slick pavement. His company had once prided itself on cutting-edge research, pushing the boundaries of human potential. Now, that ambition had morphed into a nightmare with his daughter caught in the center. How much security are we looking at? Nathan asked. Substantial, Reyes said. Thermal scanners, motion sensors, and at least a dozen guards. Plus, Keller's still out there. He glanced at Grace through the rearview mirror. They won't underestimate you again. Grace clenched her jaw. Good, I won't underestimate them either. The car turned into an abandoned parking lot adjacent to the lab. Nathan killed the engine, plunging the interior into silence. Across the street, the facility stood as a dark monolith, its concrete walls broken only by narrow, reinforced windows. A single guard booth sat at the entrance, manned by a figure whose breath fogged the glass in the chilly night. Nathan checked his weapon. The cold metal felt heavier than usual. We go in quiet, fast, no mistakes. Reyes nodded, tucking a knife into his jacket. Grace pulled a compact pistol from her bag, a weapon Nathan had reluctantly allowed her to carry. She met his gaze. "Ready?" he asked. She exhaled slowly. "Let's end this." They slipped from the car. Staying low as they crossed the street, the pavement glistened with moisture from a recent rain, muffling their footsteps. Reyes peeled off toward the security booth while Nathan and Grace crept toward the main entrance. The guard at the booth barely had time to react before Reyes appeared behind him. Wrapping an arm around his throat and cutting off his air supply, the man struggled briefly, then went limp. Reyes waved toward Nathan. "Camera feeds are down," Reyes whispered through the comms. "You're clear." Nathan led Grace to the side door. He swiped an old security card he'd kept from his days as CEO. The light turned green with a soft beep, and the door clicked open. Inside, the building smelled of ozone and industrial cleaner. Their footsteps echoed softly on the polished concrete. The dim emergency lighting cast long, jagged shadows on the walls. Where would they keep her? Grace asked. "Sub-level 2, Nathan said. "That's where the high-security labs were." They reached the stairwell. Reyes's voice crackled in their earpieces. 2 guards stationed on sub-level 2, armed, moving toward the central corridor. "Copy," Nathan said. The descent was slow, each step a calculated move. The stairwell door opened onto a sterile hallway, lined with thick glass panels revealing empty laboratories. The hum of machinery reverberated through the walls. Nathan motioned for Grace to stay back as the guards approached. He pressed against the wall, pistol raised. The first guard rounded the corner. Rifle raised, eyes scanning the shadows. Nathan fired once. The silenced shot struck the man's temple. He collapsed without a sound. The second guard spun toward the noise. Grace stepped from the shadows and squeezed the trigger. The shot hit the guard's chest, sending him sprawling backward. Nathan knelt beside Grace, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You okay?" Her eyes glimmered in the dim light. "I didn't hesitate this time." "Good," he said. "But stay sharp. It only gets harder from here." Reyes's voice returned. "They know you're here. Keller's ordered a lockdown. You've got about 5 minutes before the building goes into full containment mode." Nathan's pulse quickened. "We need to move." They sprinted down the hall. The lab at the far end bore a familiar name etched into the frosted glass. Eclipse Neurogenics. Nathan's gut twisted as he swiped his card again. The lock disengaged with a soft hiss. The lab beyond was a cold, sterile chamber dominated by a central medical chair surrounded by monitors. Electrodes dangled from the ceiling like mechanical snakes. The chair's surface was stained with blood. Grace's blood. She stared at it, face pale. Nathan touched her arm. "You survived this," he whispered. "You're stronger than they know." A door on the far side of the room opened. Footsteps approached. "Keller," Nathan said, recognizing the sharp click of high-heeled boots against the floor. The woman emerged from the shadows, gun in hand, lips curved into a mocking smile. A dark bandage wrapped around her wounded shoulder. "Persistent as always, Nathan," Keller said. "But you can't stop this." "Let her go," Nathan ordered. Aiming his pistol, Keller laughed softly. "She's not a hostage. She's the future. You think you can keep her from what she's destined to become?" Grace stepped beside Nathan. "I decide my own destiny," she said. "Do you?" Keller tilted her head. "Your mind's already changing, Grace. You feel it, don't you? The patterns, the connections, they're forming whether you want them to or not." Grace's breath caught. Nathan saw the flicker of fear in her eyes. "Don't listen to her," Nathan said, but Grace's eyes glazed over, unfocused. "The patterns," she whispered. Keller smiled. "There it is. The activation is complete. Welcome to your new self, Grace." Nathan squeezed Grace's hand. "Stay with me, sweetheart. Look at me." Her eyes snapped to his. I can see everything," she said, voice trembling. "The layout of the building, the guards, their movements, it's like watching a puzzle solve itself in real time." Keller took a step forward. "That gift is why your mother died, Grace. She fought it. Don't make the same mistake." Nathan fired. Keller anticipated the shot, ducking as the bullet shattered a glass monitor behind her. She rolled and returned fire. Nathan pulled Grace behind a metal console as bullets ricocheted around them. "She's trying to manipulate you," Nathan said. "Stay focused." Grace closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, Clarity replaced fear. "The guards are converging from the east corridor," she said. "3 of them. One's left-handed. Slower reaction time. Keller's heart rate is elevated." "She's nervous." "How do you know that?" Nathan asked. "I just see it," Grace said. Nathan risked a peek around the console. Footsteps echoed from the east corridor. Exactly as Grace predicted. "Okay," Nathan said. "Let's use it." He raised his gun. Grace whispered directions. "Wait. Now. Left. Center, right?" Nathan followed her commands and fired. The 3 guards dropped in quick succession. Keller's eyes widened. "Impossible," she hissed. Nathan stood and aimed at her head. "Not impossible, just human resilience," he fired. The bullet hit Keller squarely in the chest. Her body crumpled to the floor. Grace rushed to him, breathless. "Is she dead?" Nathan checked her pulse. "Nothing." "Yeah, it's over." The building lights flickered. Reyes's voice crackled in their ears. "You need to leave now. I triggered a purge of all digital files. The lab's going into meltdown." Nathan grabbed Grace's hand. "Time to go." They sprinted toward the exit. Behind them, the monitors exploded in showers of sparks. Alarms blared as they burst onto the street. The lab behind them erupted in a fireball, flames consuming the twisted legacy of Project Eclipse. They didn't stop running. The night sky behind them glowed with the fiery remains of the Eclipse Neurogenics lab. Flames twisted into the air like furious serpents, casting shadows across the deserted streets of Chicago. Nathan Steele gripped Grace's hand as they ran, lungs burning from smoke and exhaustion. The blast had shattered windows for blocks, and distant alarms wailed in protest, but they couldn't stop. Not yet. Reyes's voice crackled through the earpiece. 2 black SUVs just turned onto Wabash Avenue. They're coming in hot. You've got about 90 seconds. Copy that, Nathan panted. Grace squeezed his hand. 2 SUVs, she said, eyes unfocused. 6 occupants each, armed. Their formation suggests a pincer maneuver. They'll try to cut us off at the intersection. Nathan didn't ask how she knew. He trusted her instincts now. The gift they'd tried to awaken had been forced on her, but she was learning to wield it. "Reyes," Nathan said into the mic. "We need a car now." "Silver sedan, corner of 5th and Grant," Reyes replied. "Keys under the wheel well. Move." Nathan and Grace veered left, darting through an alley strewn with broken pallets and overturned dumpsters. The echo of their footsteps mingled with the distant growl of approaching engines. Grace pointed ahead. "That dumpster," she said. "Use it to climb the fence." Nathan followed her lead without question. They reached the rusty container and scrambled up. Nathan grunted as his injured side flared with pain, but he pushed through it, hoisting Grace over the fence before vaulting it himself. The landing jarred his entire body, but there was no time to recover. The silver sedan sat at the curb, exactly where Reyes had said it would be. Nathan dropped to one knee, felt under the wheel well, and found the key taped to the metal. He threw open the door as Grace slid into the passenger seat. "Seatbelt," he ordered, cranking the engine. The sedan roared to life just as the first SUV skidded around the corner behind them, headlights blazing. Bullets shattered the rear windshield as Nathan slammed the accelerator. The car surged forward, tires squealing against wet pavement. "Left on Oak Street," Grace instructed, glancing at the side mirror. "They'll try to cut us off on Michigan Avenue." Nathan turned sharply, the sedan fishtailing before regaining traction. His knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. "They're coordinating like a military unit," he muttered. "Who the hell are these people? Not just mercenaries," Grace said, eyes distant. "They're connected to something bigger, and whoever's behind them, they're still watching us." Nathan's stomach tightened. The burning lab had been a major blow, but it wasn't the end. Eclipse was more than one facility. "Reyes," Nathan said into the comm, "find me the top brass behind Project Eclipse. I want names." "Already working on it," Reyes replied. "But you rattled a hornet's nest tonight. They're locking down systems across the country. Somebody powerful doesn't want this exposed." Nathan gritted his teeth. "Yeah, well, I'm done playing defense." The sedan screeched through another turn, tires skimming the curb. Grace pointed to an underground parking garage ahead. "In there," she said. "The SUVs will overshoot if we go in fast." Nathan stomped the accelerator. The car jolted forward, racing into the dark entrance of the garage. The concrete walls compressed the roar of the engine into a deafening growl. Nathan killed the headlights and coasted into a shadowed corner. They waited, hearts racing. The SUVs thundered past the entrance seconds later, oblivious to their hiding spot. Nathan exhaled. Good call. Grace wiped sweat from her brow. I could see it, the way they'd move, like pieces on a chessboard. Yeah, Nathan said softly. You're starting to understand it. She met his gaze, eyes filled with apprehension. What if I can't stop it? What if I lose control like they said I would? You won't, Nathan said firmly. You're stronger than they ever expected. And you're not alone. We'll figure this out. Together. Her lips quivered into a faint smile. Okay. Nathan looked at the dashboard clock. 2:47 a.m. The city was still asleep, unaware of the war being waged in its shadows. Where to now? Grace asked. Reyes came back on the line. I've got something, he said. One of Richard Steele's old offshore accounts was just accessed. A shell company funneled funds into a private research facility in Colorado, and guess who the signatory is? Who? Nathan demanded. Keller, Reyes said. The woman you shot. Nathan's jaw tightened. That's impossible. I shot her point blank. Apparently not, Reyes said. She's alive and she's calling the shots from a site near Telluride. Nathan rubbed his temple. So the fire was a distraction. She's still running the operation. Looks like it, Reyes said. And based on these financial records, she's ramping up for something big. Grace's hands clenched into fists. She's still after me. Nathan nodded grimly. Yeah, and this time, we take the fight to her. They drove west, stopping only to refuel and swap cars twice to avoid detection. The Rocky Mountains rose like jagged sentinels as they approached Telluride at dawn. Reyes met them at a small motel on the outskirts of town. You're bleeding again, Reyes said, eyeing the crimson stain spreading across Nathan's side. I'll live, Nathan said. Tell me about the site. Reyes opened a tablet. It's an old NORAD satellite station. Keller's crew retrofitted it into a neurogenetic facility 2 years ago. High-level encryption on the perimeter systems. This place isn't just for experiments. It's command central. Nathan traced the satellite image with his finger. The facility was nestled in a remote valley, surrounded by dense forest and accessible by a single service road. Grace, he said, can you predict their patterns from here? She studied the image for a moment, then closed her eyes. Her breathing slowed. When she opened them again, her voice was steady. They're running shifts in 6-hour cycles. Next rotation change is at 3 p.m. Security will be stretched thin during the switch. Nathan smiled faintly. That's our window. Reyes passed him a blueprint. The main lab is underground, but getting in won't be easy. They've got biometric scanners at every entrance. Which means we need someone authorized, Nathan said. Grace's eyes widened. Keller, Nathan nodded. She's the key. We need her fingerprints and voice signature. How the hell do we get that? Reyes asked. Grace's lips pressed into a hard line. We don't go after her directly. We make her come to us. How? Nathan asked. Grace's gaze sharpened. We give her what she wants. Nathan's heart stuttered. No way, absolutely not. Grace touched his arm. Dad, listen. If she thinks I'm surrendering, she'll come herself. She won't trust anyone else to secure me. We use that to get close. No, Nathan said, shaking his head. It's too dangerous. It's the best shot we have, Grace said softly. And we'll do it on our terms. I'm not just a target anymore. I can see them coming. Nathan turned away, fists clenched. Every instinct screamed against the idea. But Grace was right. They'd been reacting this whole time. Now it was their turn to set the trap. Reyes exhaled. She's right, Steele. If we control the scenario, we have the advantage. Nathan swallowed the rising fear. Okay, he said, voice rough. We do it. But we plan this perfectly. He turned to Grace. No heroics, no unnecessary risks. She squeezed his hand. Deal. Reyes cracked his knuckles. Let's bait the hook. Nathan's stomach knotted as they laid out the plan. He was about to use his daughter as bait to lure a predator, and the only thing more terrifying than that was the possibility that Keller might win. The war for Grace's mind was entering its final stage, and this time, Nathan vowed, the hunters would become the hunted. The morning sun cast a pale, cold glow across the small motel room, its rays struggling to pierce the tension thickening the air. Nathan Steele sat at the rickety table, elbows on his knees, forehead resting against interlaced fingers. Across from him, Grace methodically dismantled and reassembled a pistol. Her movements were mechanical, precise, a reflection of the sharpened instincts they had forced upon her. Reyes paced near the window, occasionally peeking through the blinds at the quiet street beyond. "We're cutting it close," he muttered. Nathan grunted in agreement. "That's how traps work." He looked at Grace. "You still sure about this?" She didn't stop working. "It's the only way." Nathan's chest tightened. His daughter, just days ago an ordinary young woman, now sat before him transformed, eyes sharper, posture poised like a soldier. He hated that this war had stolen her innocence. But more than that, he feared losing her to the very instincts Eclipse had tried to unlock. "Okay," he said, exhaling slowly. "Let's run it through one last time." Grace snapped the pistol's slide into place. "We broadcast a message using their encrypted frequency. I tell Keller I'm surrendering to stop the hunt. I say I'll meet her at the Ridge Canyon overlook at exactly 3 p.m. "She won't believe it's that simple," Reyes said. "She won't," Grace agreed. "But she won't ignore it either. She'll come with a tactical team. She needs me alive for Phase 3, which means she won't order them to shoot immediately." Nathan tapped the table. "And that's when we move." Grace nodded. "I'll keep her talking. She'll want to test whether I've really changed while she monologues. You and Reyes take out her team and get close enough to subdue her." Reyes crossed his arms. "We screw this up, and she'll know it's a trap. If she escapes, the lab goes into lockdown, and we lose our shot." Nathan ran a hand over his face. "Then we don't screw it up." He opened the laptop Reyes had modified earlier. The screen displayed an encrypted communications interface linked to one of Eclipse's covert channels. Grace took a deep breath and positioned herself in front of the webcam. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted her hair. "You got this," Nathan whispered. Grace straightened her shoulders, took a deep breath, and pressed the record button. Her expression shifted instantly. Vulnerability replaced by steely resignation. "This is Grace Bennett," she said into the camera. "I'm tired of running. I know what you want from me. If it means protecting my dad and everyone else, I'll give myself up." She bit her lip, eyes glistening with manufactured tears. "Meet me at Ridge Canyon. Overlook at 3 p.m. No tricks, just let's end this." She ended the recording with a single click. Reyes transmitted the message across the encrypted frequency. The screen blinked with a confirmation code. "Message sent," Reyes announced. Nathan's gut twisted. Now we wait. The Ridge Canyon overlook sat atop a steep bluff, overlooking a jagged valley that stretched toward the Rockies. The dirt road leading up to the site was narrow, bordered by cliffs on one side and thick pine forest on the other. A stiff wind howled through the canyon, carrying the sharp scent of pine resin and damp earth. Nathan lay prone atop a ridge 50 yards from the meeting point, rifle pressed against his shoulder. Through the scope, he had a clear view of the overlook's gravel clearing where Grace stood alone, hood up, hands in her jacket pockets. Her face remained calm, but Nathan knew the mask hid the storm beneath. Reyes was positioned in the tree line on the opposite side, his silhouette blending into the shadows. "Movement," Reyes said over the comm. Nathan adjusted the scope. A convoy of 3 black SUVs crested the hill, engines growling. The vehicles stopped 10 feet from Grace, doors opened in unison. 6 armed men stepped out first, rifles raised. Then came Keller. She wore a dark tactical jacket, her left arm in a sling from Nathan's bullet. Her smile was faint but predatory as she approached Grace. Nathan tightened his grip on the trigger. "Easy," Reyes whispered. "Wait for it." Keller stopped 2 feet from Grace. The wind tugged at her blonde hair. Well, Keller said, voice carrying over the wind. "I wasn't sure if you had it in you, but here you are." Grace lowered her gaze. "I'm tired. You win." "Do I?" Keller tilted her head. "You don't strike me as the surrendering type." "Maybe I realized fighting is pointless," Grace said. Maybe I want to understand what's happening to me." Keller's eyes narrowed. "The patterns. You've started seeing them, haven't you? The connections, the threads that bind the chaos into order?" Grace hesitated, then gave a slight nod. "Good," Keller said. That clarity is your birthright. It's what your mother tried to deny you. She extended her right hand. Come with me, Grace. Let me help you reach your full potential. Grace shifted, glancing toward the SUVs. And my dad? Keller smiled. He's irrelevant now. You've outgrown him. Nathan's vision went red. His finger brushed the trigger. Wait, Grace whispered into her concealed mic. Nathan froze. Grace stepped closer to Keller. You said I could predict things if I embraced the process, she said. That I'd see the future. So let me prove it to you. Keller arched a brow. How? Grace's eyes locked with hers. I know exactly how this meeting will end. Keller laughed softly. Is that so? Yeah, Grace said. Because right now, 2 snipers are lining up shots on your men. Keller's eyes widened. Now, Grace said. Nathan fired. The bullet struck the nearest guard in the temple. Reyes's shot dropped another. Chaos erupted. The remaining guards scrambled for cover, but Grace lunged at Keller, slamming her shoulder into the woman's chest. They crashed to the ground. Nathan picked off a third guard, then sprinted down the hill. Heart racing, Keller writhed beneath Grace, trying to pull a sidearm from her belt. Grace snatched the weapon first. Keller froze, staring at the barrel now pressed against her forehead. Don't do it, Keller said. You're better than this. Grace's hand trembled. Grace, Nathan shouted, reaching them. Don't let her win, Keller smiled. You can't fight your nature, Grace. We made you to be more than this. Grace's finger twitched on the trigger. Then she exhaled and stepped back. You're right, she said coldly. I am more than this. Nathan grabbed Keller and hauled her to her feet. Securing her wrists with zip ties, blood trickled from a gash on her forehead. You're done, Nathan said. Keller chuckled. You still don't get it, do you? Grace was just the prototype. We've already deployed the algorithm. Thousands of minds connected through digital infrastructure. Finance, military, infrastructure. The network is live. Nathan's heart stuttered. You're lying. Am I? Keller smirked. Shoot me, and you lose your only chance to stop it. Nathan stared into her eyes, searching for deception. She's telling the truth, Grace said, voice distant. I can feel it. The connections. They're already there. Nathan's blood ran cold. Eclipse had moved beyond genetics. They'd turned Grace's abilities into a global tool for domination. What do we do? He asked Grace. She closed her eyes. When she opened them, they gleamed with cold determination. We end it, she said. All of it. The wind howled across the ridge canyon overlook. Carrying with it the scent of pine and gunpowder, Nathan Steele gripped Keller's bound wrists as if his life depended on it. And maybe it did. Blood dripped from the cut on her forehead, but the satisfaction in her eyes hadn't wavered. We end it, Grace had said. Nathan turned to his daughter. How do we stop something that's already live? Grace's eyes glazed over for a moment as she focused on the unseen web of connections in her mind. The network. It's distributed across global servers, but there's a central control node. She blinked and pointed east. It's at the Telluride command facility. Deep underground, if we destroy that hub, the entire network collapses. You're bluffing, Keller sneered. Grace shook her head. You made me see the patterns. Now I see everything. Reyes jogged toward them, rifle in hand. The guards are down. We've got maybe 10 minutes before reinforcements arrive. What's the call? Nathan met Grace's gaze. We go to the facility. We end Eclipse tonight. Reyes cursed under his breath but nodded. Then let's move. Nathan hauled Keller toward the remaining SUV. You're coming with us, he said. We'll need your biometrics to get inside. Keller's expression hardened. But she didn't resist. You're making a mistake, she said, as Nathan shoved her into the back seat. I've made plenty, Nathan replied, but not this time. The drive to the facility was tense. Grace sat in the front passenger seat, eyes closed, lips moving softly as though deciphering invisible code. Nathan stole glances at her, heart aching. She was fighting a war inside her mind, one they barely understood. You okay, sweetheart? He asked. Grace opened her eyes. They were sharp, bright with an eerie clarity. The network's trying to adapt, she said. I can feel it shifting defenses, but it can't predict us. Not yet. Nathan squeezed the steering wheel. We'll keep it that way. Reyes's voice crackled over the comm. We're 5 minutes out. Satellite feed shows increased activity at the site. Looks like they know something's coming. Grace tilted her head. They know I'm coming, she corrected. But they're looking for me to arrive from the north. She tapped the screen on Reyes's laptop. Take the maintenance access road on the south ridge. It's narrow, but unguarded. How the hell do you know that? Reyes asked. Grace's gaze didn't waver. I just do. The SUV skidded onto the gravel path, headlights bouncing as they climbed the steep incline. At the crest, Nathan killed the lights. The facility sprawled below, a concrete complex carved into the mountainside, its entrance flanked by armored guards and mounted turrets. Nathan turned to Keller. Open the gate. No tricks. Keller's lips twitched. Or what? You'll shoot me. No, Grace said, voice icy. But I will. Keller's eyes flicked to Grace and found no mercy there. She smirked faintly. Like mother, like daughter, she said, then placed her hand on the biometric scanner Reyes had wired to the car. A green light blinked. The main gate creaked open. Move, Nathan said. The SUV rolled forward. The guards didn't even glance at the vehicle as it passed. To them, Keller was a high-level asset returning from an external operation. But the moment they cleared the gate, alarms blared. Shit, Reyes hissed. They caught on. Get to the command center, Nathan barked. Grace, lead the way. The facility's interior was sterile and industrial, with polished concrete floors and cold fluorescent lighting. Grace navigated the maze of corridors as if she'd memorized the layout. Nathan and Reyes flanked her with weapons drawn. Keller, wrists bound with zip ties, walked ahead as their unwilling guide. They reached a reinforced door marked Primary Command Center. Keller's palm and voice print were required to open it. Do it, Nathan ordered. Keller glared at him, then leaned toward the intercom. Keller, authorization Delta 7. The door hissed open. Inside, rows of servers hummed, their indicator lights blinking like a mechanical constellation. The main terminal stood on a raised platform. Grace sprinted to it. Reyes moved to cover the entrance while Nathan shoved Keller into a chair and aimed his pistol at her. One move, Nathan warned, and you're done. Keller tilted her head. You're in over your head, Steele. Do you really think one facility shutdown will stop us? Eclipse is bigger than this building. Nathan's hand steadied. We'll see. Grace's fingers danced over the keyboard, screens filled with cascading code. She frowned. They're rerouting server control through secondary nodes. I need more time. How much? Nathan asked. 2 minutes, she said. The overhead speakers crackled. A voice echoed through the room. Grace Bennett, it said, calm and mechanical. We know you're there. Stop this now, and we will not harm your father. Nathan's eyes locked with Grace's. She shook her head, face pale but determined. Don't listen, Nathan said. The voice continued. You've felt the power, Grace. The clarity. Don't let them take that from you. You can be so much more. Grace's hands faltered on the keyboard. Grace? Nathan barked. She blinked and resumed typing. Keller chuckled softly. She's already ours. Nathan pistol whipped her. Keller slumped unconscious. 30 seconds, Grace shouted. Reyes fired at figures appearing at the far end of the hallway. They're coming in hot. Nathan joined him, squeezing off rounds as black-clad operatives advanced. Muzzle flashes lit the corridor. Bullets chewed through the walls around them. 10 seconds, Grace called. A bullet grazed Nathan's arm. He hissed in pain but kept firing. Reyes dropped 2 assailants before taking a hit to the shoulder. He fell with a grunt. Got it, Grace screamed. She hit the enter key. The server racks groaned as power surged through them. Sparks erupted from consoles. The facility lights flickered, then died. The screens all displayed the same message. Core network disrupted. System failure irreversible. The facility trembled. Explosions erupted deep below, shaking the floor. Time to go, Nathan shouted. He hoisted Reyes onto his shoulder and grabbed Grace's hand. They sprinted toward the emergency exit. The building groaned as detonations cascaded through the subterranean levels. Fire licked at the walls, and smoke thickened the air. They burst into the open just as a massive explosion tore through the mountain, sending debris skyward. The shockwave knocked them off their feet. Nathan shielded Grace with his body as concrete shrapnel rained down. When the dust settled, The facility was gone, reduced to a smoldering crater. Nathan coughed and helped Grace to her feet. Reyes groaned beside them but gave a thumbs up. "It worked," Grace whispered. Nathan followed her gaze to the sky. The stars flickered, unobstructed by digital interference. The omnipresent hum she'd felt in the back of her mind was gone. "It's over," Nathan said. Grace leaned into him. "Yeah," she whispered. "It's over." But as the wind carried away the last traces of smoke, Nathan couldn't shake the feeling that the war wasn't truly finished. Eclipse might be dead, but the minds behind it were still out there, and they would never forget the name Grace Bennett, or the father who had helped her burn their empire to the ground.